Lilly's story begins in the shadowy hills of 19th century Bavaria, where a lonely dollmaker named Klaus Henschel toiled in his dim workshop. Klaus was known for his uncanny ability to create lifelike dolls, but his fame was overshadowed by his eccentricity and reclusive nature. Villagers whispered about his strange habits, lights glowing late into the night, bizarre chants echoing from his workshop, and Klaus's peculiar fascination with the supernatural. What no one realized was that Klaus wasn't just making dolls, he was experimenting with life itself. In the winter of 1863, Klaus began work on what he called his masterpiece. He spent months crafting the doll, naming it Lilly, after a little girl he had once loved and lost to illness. Lilly's face was molded from the finest porcelain. Her eyes were made of radiant blue glass imported from Venice, and her hair was spun from real human strands. But this wasn't enough for Klaus. He didn't want Lilly to be beautiful. He wanted her to live. Desperate, Klaus turned to the dark arts. He unearthed ancient texts said to hold the secrets to binding a soul to an object. One moonless night, he performed a forbidden ritual. The ritual required innocence, a sacrifice pure and untouched by the world. Klaus, consumed by his obsession, chose Greta, his 7-year-old daughter. The ritual was brutal. Klaus slit Greta's palm and let her blood soak into the doll's porcelain frame. As the child wept and begged for mercy, Klaus whispered ancient incantations, summoning forces he did not fully understand. When Greta took her final breath, a heavy silence fell over the workshop. Lilly's eyes gleamed. From that moment, Klaus's life unraveled. At first, he believed he had succeeded. Lilly seemed different from his other creations. Her eyes followed him wherever he went, her expression shifting subtly as though she were alive. He felt her presence even when he wasn't in the room. At night, he heard the faint sound of a child's laughter, though the workshop was empty. Soon, the laughter turned to whispers. Klaus could barely make out the words, but they seemed angry, accusing. Objects began moving on their own. A paintbrush flung itself across the room, the door to the workshop slammed shut without warning, and Klaus's tools would go missing only to reappear in strange places. He started seeing shadows in the corners of his vision, always accompanied by the faint scent of blood. Villagers noticed Klaus's decline. He stopped leaving his workshop, his once robust frame reduced to a gaunt shadow of its former self. When questioned, he muttered about keeping her happy and paying the price. No one understood his words. Months later, Klaus was found dead in his workshop. His body was slumped over his workbench, his face twisted in an expression of unspeakable terror. Lilly sat on the bench beside him, pristine and untouched. After Klaus's death, the doll was passed down through several families, each of whom met with tragedy. In 1904, the Miller family inherited Lilly when they purchased Klaus's abandoned home. Their 6-year-old daughter, Annika, took an immediate liking to the doll and insisted on keeping it in her room. Within weeks, the family began experiencing strange phenomena. Annika's parents often heard her talking to someone late at night. When they questioned her, she said she was speaking to Lilly. Her mother dismissed it as childish imagination until the bruises appeared. Annika woke up with dark, hand-shaped marks on her arms and neck, claiming, "Lilly gets mad when I don't listen." One night, Annika's mother awoke to the sound of her daughter screaming. Rushing into the room, she found Annika standing on her bed, pointing at the doll. "She's moving!" The child shrieked. The mother grabbed the doll and threw it into the basement, but the torment didn't stop. The family began hearing footsteps in the house at all hours, and the faint giggle of a child echoed through the halls. The final straw came when Annika's father found the doll sitting at the foot of their bed one morning, despite the basement being locked. The family fled the house, leaving Lilly behind. In the decades that followed, Lilly was discovered by various individuals. Each encounter ended in horror. A wealthy collector named Wilhelm Faust acquired Lilly as part of a doll collection in 1922. Wilhelm, a staunch skeptic, dismissed the stories of Lilly's curse as nonsense. Within weeks, His servants quit, claiming they heard whispers and saw shadows moving in the house. Wilhelm's body was discovered shortly thereafter, his throat slashed by an unseen force. His death was ruled a suicide, though no weapon was ever found. During World War II, Lilly was donated to an orphanage outside Berlin. The children adored her, but the staff reported disturbing incidents: doors locking on their own, children waking up screaming, and one boy who claimed Lilly whispered secrets to him at night. After a fire destroyed the orphanage, Lilly was found in the ashes, unscathed. In 1978, Lilly resurfaced in the possession of a paranormal investigator named Gerhard Klein. Determined to debunk her legend, Gerhard set up cameras and recording devices. What he captured was chilling. Footage showed the doll's head turning, its eyes blinking, and faint voices murmuring, "Why did you leave me?" Gerhard abandoned his research after experiencing vivid nightmares of a little girl clawing at his throat. He died 6 months later in a car crash. No one knows where Lilly is now. Some believe she resides in a private collection, hidden from public view. Others claim she's still out there, occasionally appearing in antique shops or flea markets, waiting for her next victim. What makes Lilly truly terrifying is the nature of her curse. Unlike other haunted objects, Lilly doesn't merely cause misfortune. She feeds on fear, tormenting her owners until they're driven to madness or death. Her origins, tied to the brutal sacrifice of an innocent child, seem to have infused her with a malevolent spirit that grows stronger with every victim. If you ever come across a porcelain doll with radiant blue eyes, auburn hair, and a faint smirk, take heed. She might just be Lilly, waiting patiently for someone to take her home. And once she's with you, she'll never let you go. When Anthony Quinata first encountered Harold the doll on eBay in 2003, he didn't believe in haunted objects. He was a skeptic, plain and simple. But he loved collecting bizarre and unusual items to resell or study. When he read the eBay listing describing the doll as cursed and causing nightmares, health problems, and strange noises, he thought it was a clever gimmick to inflate the price. Curiosity got the better of him, and for a mere $720, Harold was his. What Anthony didn't know was that this decision would haunt him, literally. When Harold arrived, Anthony wasn't impressed. The doll was a small, cracked porcelain figure with a faded childlike face and a threadbare outfit. It looked fragile, like something that might crumble if dropped. He placed the doll on his desk, planning to research its origins later. That night, Anthony started to feel a dull ache in his temples. He brushed it off as stress. But then, around 2 a.m., he was jolted awake by the sound of a child's laughter echoing through his home. Anthony didn't have children. His house was empty. Cautiously, he searched every room, but he found nothing. When he returned to his bedroom, the laughter came again, closer this time, as though it were coming from inside the walls. The following morning, Anthony decided to move Harold to his garage. Just in case, he told himself. But the moment he touched the doll, he felt a sudden searing pain in his chest, as if someone was stabbing him with an ice pick. The pain subsided as soon as he let go. That night he dreamed of Harold for the first time. In the dream, Harold wasn't a doll but a boy, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through Anthony's soul. The boy stood at the foot of his bed, whispering in a language Anthony couldn't understand. He woke up drenched in sweat, his chest aching again. When Anthony checked the garage, Harold was no longer where he'd left him. The doll was back in the house, sitting upright on the living room couch. Over the next few weeks, Anthony's life became a waking nightmare. The lights in his house flickered at random intervals. His beloved dog, Max, began growling at empty corners of the room and refused to enter the living room where Harold sat. Anthony's friends reported feeling sick or dizzy when visiting. One friend even claimed she saw Harold's cracked lips twitch, as if he were trying to speak. But the most chilling incident happened one stormy evening. Anthony was working in his home office when he heard the sound of a child crying. He followed the sound to the living room, where Harold sat. The crying stopped as soon as he stepped into the room. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and Anthony swore he saw the doll's head turn ever so slightly to face him. He backed away, but his body froze as a raspy, guttural voice hissed, "You shouldn't have brought me here." Terrified, Anthony reached out to a priest to bless the doll and cleanse his home. The priest arrived the next day, visibly uneasy when he saw Harold. As he began the blessing, the room became oppressively cold, and a rancid smell filled the air. The priest began to pray louder, but Harold's presence seemed to fight back. Mid-prayer, the priest clutched his chest and collapsed. Paramedics arrived shortly after, finding him alive but barely. He later claimed to have felt an unholy presence trying to silence him. Determined to rid himself of the doll, Anthony considered destroying Harold, but he soon learned that others who had owned Harold had tried this and failed. One man reportedly attempted to burn the doll, only for the fire to go out inexplicably. Another tried to drown it, only to hear eerie giggling as it floated back to the surface. Anthony opted to store Harold in a sealed case and placed it in the darkest corner of his home. However, the activity didn't stop. Footsteps echoed at night. His health continued to deteriorate. Unexplained migraines, insomnia, and weight loss plagued him. Visitors reported nightmares and strange bruises after being near the doll. The breaking point came when Anthony woke one night to the sensation of someone sitting on his chest. He opened his eyes to see Harold standing on his chest, glaring at him with lifeless porcelain eyes. The doll's cracked face twisted into a sinister grin. Anthony screamed and pushed the doll away, but when he turned on the lights, Harold was sitting innocently on the dresser, as though nothing had happened. Yet the bruises on his chest told a different story. Desperate, Anthony reached out to paranormal investigators. Their readings confirmed a malevolent presence attached to Harold. They advised him to never provoke or destroy the doll, as doing so might unleash whatever entity was bound to it. Instead, Anthony placed Harold in a secure case and began documenting his experiences. Over time, Anthony's life returned to some semblance of normalcy, though Harold remained a dark shadow over him. To this day, Harold is stored away, but he is far from dormant. Paranormal investigators and visitors who encounter the doll report feeling uneasy, hearing whispers, or experiencing sudden illness. Anthony warns anyone who comes into contact with Harold to treat the doll with caution. He believes Harold isn't just haunted, it's cursed, tied to something far more sinister than a restless spirit. And while Harold remains silent for now, Anthony is certain that one day the doll will awaken again. So if you ever see a doll with cracked porcelain skin and faded blue eyes, take a closer look. If it smiles at you, run. Harold doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. The Quesnel Museum in British Columbia is a quiet place, nestled in a quaint town where history lingers in whispers and shadows. Among its eclectic collection of artifacts stands Mandy the doll, an antique porcelain figure with cracked features, lifeless glass eyes, and a malevolent reputation. Donated in 1991, Mandy has since earned her place not for her craftsmanship, but for the darkness that seems to cling to her like a second skin. Clara had only been in town for a few weeks when she accepted the position of night security guard at the museum. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a job, and she thought it would be easy, just monitoring cameras, locking doors, and walking through the exhibits a few times a night. On her first evening, as her supervisor handed her the keys, he hesitated. "Keep an eye on Mandy," he said, nodding toward the corner where the doll's glass case sat, dimly lit under a flickering bulb. Clara followed his gaze, spotting the unsettling figure with her faded dress and cracked porcelain face. "What's the story with her?" Clara asked, forcing a smile, hoping for a light-hearted explanation. "She's got quirks," he replied. His voice lowered as if the doll might overhear. "Things move around her. People feel strange, like they're being watched. Just keep your distance." Clara chuckled nervously, brushing off his warning. Surely it was just a way to add a bit of local color to her otherwise dull job. That night, as she walked her first patrol, the museum's old wooden floors creaked under her boots. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, and the faint hum of the building's heating system was the only sound. She passed Mandy's case and paused. The doll's cracked features were unnerving. Her painted eyes seemed to follow Clara as she moved, and her pale fingers, chipped and delicate, were positioned as though frozen mid-reach. Clara shook off the unease and continued her rounds. Back in the security office, Clara reviewed the camera feeds while sipping her coffee. It was a routine she quickly adopted to pass the long, quiet hours. As she skimmed through the screens, something caught her attention on the feed from Mandy's exhibit. The camera flickered, static crackling across the screen. For a brief moment, the doll's case appeared empty. Clara blinked and rewound the footage. There it was again, just a flash, barely noticeable. "Must be a glitch," she muttered, her voice shaky despite her attempt to stay calm. She dismissed it and continued with her shift. Over the following nights, the museum began to feel less like a place of preserved history and more like something alive. Objects were frequently misplaced. A brochure stand tipped over one morning, though Clara swore it had been upright during her patrol. Once, she returned to the security office to find the door slightly open, though she was certain she had locked it. But the strangest moments always happened near Mandy. The doll's position seemed to shift ever so slightly. Her head, tilted one way during one patrol, would appear differently on the next. Her hands seemed closer to the glass. Clara tried to rationalize it, blaming exhaustion and her imagination. One night, Clara was sitting in the security office when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were soft, almost hesitant, like bare feet against the wooden floors. She froze, staring at the monitors. The feeds showed empty halls, each exhibit bathed in dim light. The footsteps grew louder, moving closer. They stopped just outside the office door. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She grabbed her flashlight and crept toward the door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle and yanked it open. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the sound resumed, now heading in the direction of Mandy's case. Gathering her courage, Clara followed the noise. The exhibit hall felt colder than usual, the kind of chill that seeped into her bones. She reached Mandy's display and stopped dead in her tracks. The glass case was open. Mandy was gone. A giggle echoed through the room, faint and childlike, sending a jolt of fear down Clara's spine. She swung her flashlight around, the beam catching nothing but empty air. Then she saw her. Mandy was on the floor, leaning against the base of another display. Her glassy eyes stared directly at Clara, and her cracked smile seemed wider, almost alive. Clara's heart raced as she backed away. She reached for her radio, but before she could call for help, the lights flickered and went out. The museum was plunged into darkness. Clara fumbled with her flashlight, its weak beam barely cutting through the oppressive black. Another giggle echoed, louder this time, bouncing off the walls. "Who's there?" Clara shouted, her voice trembling. "This isn't funny." A sharp crash made her jump. She turned to see one of the display cases shattered, its contents strewn across the floor. In the chaos, Mandy was gone again. Clara turned in frantic circles, her flashlight darting across the room. She caught glimpses of movement, small darting shapes just beyond the edge of the light. Then she felt it, a cold, clammy hand brushing against her ankle. She screamed, stumbling backward. Her flashlight hit the ground and spun, its beam landing on Mandy. The doll was standing upright, impossibly balanced, her cracked grin radiating malice. The whispers began then, faint and unintelligible, growing louder with each passing second. Clara's chest tightened, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the air grew icy. Desperate, she grabbed her flashlight and swung it at the doll. The beam shattered Mandy's porcelain head, shards flying in all directions. The whispers ceased, the room falling silent. Clara stood there, shaking as she caught her breath. But just as she thought it was over, a soft, rhythmic tapping began. She looked down to see the shards of porcelain clicking together, pulling themselves back into place. Clara didn't wait to see the outcome. She ran, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls as she fled the museum. The next morning, Clara quit her job. When the museum staff arrived, they found Mandy back in her case, perfectly intact. But visitors claimed the atmosphere around Mandy had grown heavier, the whispers faint but persistent, as if the doll was waiting for her next chance to escape. And in the shadows, her glass eyes watched. The story of Annabelle the doll is one of the most chilling tales of modern paranormal lore, steeped in terror and unrelenting malevolence. This seemingly innocent Raggedy Ann doll has become a symbol of how darkness can hide behind the most unassuming of facades, a wolf in sheep's clothing waiting to pounce. Its story began in the 1970s, when it came into the possession of a young nursing student named Donna. Donna was gifted the doll by her mother, who had purchased it at a local hobby shop. At first, it was nothing more than a quaint decoration for Donna's apartment, a nostalgic nod to her childhood that she shared with her roommate Angie. But what started as a light-hearted gift soon became the source of their greatest nightmare. The doll's strange behavior began almost immediately. Donna and Angie noticed that the doll seemed to move on its own. At first, the changes were subtle, a shift in position, a tilt of the head. The roommates dismissed these as tricks of the mind or coincidental bumps that might have jostled the doll. But the movements became bolder. They would leave the doll in one room and return to find it in another. Once Donna found the doll inexplicably sitting on her bed with the bedroom door closed, a door Donna swore she had left open. Their unease deepened when they began finding small pieces of parchment paper scattered throughout the apartment, each bearing chilling, childlike messages written in a crude hand. The notes, scrawled in pencil, said things like "help us," and even more disturbingly, "help Lou." The roommates were bewildered not only by the messages, but also by the fact that neither of them owned parchment paper. Their friend Lou, a regular visitor to the apartment, was particularly disturbed by the doll. From the moment he first saw it, he felt a deep, unexplainable sense of dread. Lou, a pragmatic man by nature, tried to dismiss his unease as irrational. But as the days passed, his fear grew stronger. One night, Lou had a vivid and horrifying nightmare. In his dream, he was lying on the couch when he felt a heavy weight on his chest. Opening his eyes, he saw Annabelle slowly crawling up his body. The doll stopped at his throat and began to strangle him. He awoke gasping for air, his hands clawing at his neck, but the nightmare didn't end. He felt deep scratches raking across his chest, and when he finally managed to turn on the light, he found fresh claw marks gouged into his skin. The wounds burned but healed alarmingly quickly, leaving no trace by the following day. Terrified by this escalation, Donna decided to consult a psychic medium. During the séance, the medium claimed that the doll was inhabited by the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. According to the medium, Annabelle had lived on the land before the apartment complex was built and had died there under tragic circumstances. She was lonely and sought companionship. Moved by the story, Donna and Angie decided to allow the spirit to remain in the doll, believing they were offering a child a measure of peace. This act of compassion would prove to be their greatest mistake. Unbeknownst to Donna and Angie, the spirit inhabiting Annabelle was no child. It was a demonic entity using the guise of innocence to manipulate its victims. The doll's activity escalated in the weeks that followed. Loud banging noises echoed through the apartment at night. Donna and Angie felt the sensation of being watched, and cold spots would suddenly appear in rooms. Lou, still haunted by his own experience, begged Donna to get rid of the doll. But it wasn't until the entity became physically aggressive that Donna sought professional help. The roommates contacted a local priest, who in turn reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned paranormal investigators. The Warrens arrived at the apartment and immediately sensed the dark energy surrounding the doll. After conducting their investigation, they concluded that the doll itself was not possessed, but rather manipulated by an inhuman spirit. The Warrens explained that the spirit's goal was far more sinister than merely haunting the apartment. It was seeking to claim a human soul. The doll was merely a conduit, a way to infiltrate the lives of its victims and gain their trust before striking. The Warrens conducted a series of prayers and blessings to cleanse the apartment, but they warned Donna and Angie that the doll could not simply be discarded. Objects manipulated by spirits often act as anchors for their presence. The Warrens decided to take the doll with them to their occult museum in Monroe, Connecticut, where it could be contained and monitored. Annabelle was placed in a specially constructed glass case, inscribed with protective prayers and blessed by a priest. The case bore a stern warning: positively do not open. Even in containment, Annabelle's malevolence continued to manifest. Visitors to the Warrens but this museum often reported feeling an oppressive energy near the doll. Some claimed to see the doll's head or eyes move despite the sealed case. One particularly chilling incident involved a young man who mocked the doll during a tour, daring it to do its worst. On his way home, he lost control of his motorcycle and crashed into a tree, dying instantly. His girlfriend, though injured, later recounted that they had been joking about Annabelle just moments before the accident. The Warrens themselves warned that Annabelle was among the most dangerous items in their collection, a stark reminder of the dangers of meddling with the unknown. Today, Annabelle remains locked away in her glass prison, a silent but potent reminder of the darkness that exists just beyond the veil of human understanding. Though the doll appears harmless, its history is steeped in tragedy, fear, and death. Annabelle's story is more than just a cautionary tale. It is a testament to the terrifying reality of the paranormal and the thin line between the mundane and the malevolent. As she sits in her case, one cannot help but wonder, is Annabelle truly contained, or is she merely waiting for her next opportunity to strike? Thank you for watching this video by Sanctum Obscura. If you enjoyed unraveling the darkness with us, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay curious, stay brave, and remember, some mysteries are better left in the shadows. See you next time.